we are using divers to do that, and I think robots can definitely help in scaling that up.
All right.
Audience question?
Yep.
I hope I haven't missed it, but what sort of data do you collect prior to selecting the locations for your applications? So that how do you assess the environment and what the problems are in those environments before you start replanting or outplanting? A new word for me.
It's a great question. So I think typically when a reef starts to degrade, the source of of the problem is usually somewhat known, right? Is it rising temperature? Is it that there was a disease that came through? Is it a hurricane or coastal pollution? Those kind of things. But whether or not that's going to be a chronic or an acute stress isn't always as clear. And then on top of it, where do you plant it back out again? Because you're starting, if you're starting with a degraded reef and you're bringing out these small corals to repopulate it, it may not be as easy as, oh, well, this was once a
Healthy reef.
Healthy reef, thank you. that can then repopulate it. You may need to know where exactly to start as a nucleation site, right? So where is the right circulation to bring nutrients? Where is the right kind of refuge from some temperature anomaly, so that you can start to get that hub and then start building that reef up. And reefs are so complex because it's not just the coral, right? It's also you need sponges there there are all these large-scale population interactions that are really difficult
It's a whole community
to think about in that replanting.
AI.
What about artificial reefs, things like shipwrecks or actual custom designed, structures that are meant to mimic the architecture of a reef, like what we're seeing there? I think it's called a reef ball. Is that?
Yeah, this is an example of a reef ball, and they're concrete structures that are put in the water. This is an example. This was taken in the Turks and Caicos recently. And these are about 3 years old, 3 to 4 years old in terms of how long they've been in the water.
So not a lot of growth, really.
Not a lot of growth for 3 to 4 years. So this is coming back to, again, this is a slow process. And so, these artificial reefs are serving some, benefit already. Having these large structures in the water is helping with erosion, wave attenuation, things like that. But ultimately, you need it to grow and proliferate and become a reef. And so artificial reefs in general haven't had a lot of success. I mean, variable success, again, everything, it varies on the environment, and some artificial reefs have taken off. And then there's others that, kind of sit and it takes a really long time to kind of establish that reef.
So what kinds of things is the Reef Solutions Initiative team working on strategies to get coral to actually come and settle on that concrete structure?
Yeah, so some of the things Yogi referred to earlier, so like soundscapes, the sounds that you heard when you came in earlier, providing the right sounds. It's been shown that this can help actually recruit or bring in larvae, which are the small the larvae that will come and settle on the reef and then divide and then become a polyp and then ultimately become a coral. So you can provide sounds, changing the hydrodynamics. So these have these little holes in them, and that provides some sort of refuge for fish. It also keeps the water flow around the reef structure. So the nutrients are coming up to the surface where the corals are growing. Other things are introducing probiotics. So just like with trying to have a healthy gut, right? So provide a healthy microbiome that will help bring in corals and then give them a head start in terms of acquiring those essential symbionts to grow. And then lastly, some of the work that I had talked about earlier that we're thinking about in terms of outplants and nurseries, we also want to start thinking about more bio-inspired materials. So if you can think about not just putting out concrete, what if you actually had nutrient-infused materials? What if you had materials that were actually going to provide a benefit to the coral, not just be a physical presence, but actually provide an ability for that coral to build its immunity, to build its resilience? So those are some of, and again, it's bringing all these things together, which I know Yogi will bring up. What are you going to say, Yogi?
Yeah.
So yeah, because it's a lot to try to figure out how to optimize that environment.
Yeah, I mean, a lot to optimize, lots of confounding variables, and yeah, a lot to experiment with. But also, just like I think robots could also help with the actual process of putting these things together, at the moment, right? So maybe and once you have put them together, kind of keeping an eye on them. Are they early? Just same thing as how you are diagnosing like a reef. You want to sort of keep an eye on what you have done and be able to react as needed. So so building them at scale and and keeping an eye on them, I think that's good.
Yeah, and make modifications as necessary, right? So if we're watching them in real time.
Yeah, so it's not just dump it,
throw them out there,
but just interact with it, so fix it as needed.
Right.
Yeah, so one of the things I find really cool about the Reef Solutions Initiative, and actually all of WHOI, is that you have all these interactions between people in different fields. So right now you're watching an engineer and a biogeochemist talk to each other, but within the Reef Solution Initiative, there's also people who work on microbiology and acoustics and the physical flow within the ocean. And all of those factors are really important to bring together using Yogi's AI to really figure out what's going on in a complicated place like a reef.
Yeah.
Right.
Any more questions? I see a hand in the back there.
Thank you. So it's so encouraging. There are so many different ways in which I think it's clear that we're starting to figure out what works, right? What actually can make a difference. But I see a problem of scale, right? We've lost 50% of the world's coral reefs in the last 30 years. And so many of these activities are in their nascent stages, right? Where we're still figuring out, okay, this is encouraging. If we do this, if we tweak this, it makes a little bit of a difference. And this is a question for both of you, really, on the robotics side, but also on the science side, and also on the kind of the side of engaging with communities that live with and depend on coral reefs. What do you see as the keys to scaling solutions to this really, truly massive crisis?
Sam, you're stealing my next question, but I'll forgive you. Go
Perfect
ahead.
segue.
Do you want to start?
No, you can,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I think you should start.
right. Yeah.
I gotta think.
Yeah. So scaling is an interesting challenge. So what does it mean to scale, right? So there are so many coral reefs everywhere around the world, and I think what is needed is yes, we don't need this magical $1 million robot which can do everything and perfectly, but we can only put it at one location in the world, right? Well, what we need is $1,000 robots which can be given out to everybody who needs them, right? So and to diagnose their reefs early on or to intervene early on, and tiny robust sort of robots that easily you don't need an engineer to deploy them. Anybody can deploy them, and I think what that means is we need to develop technologies which are kind of more less complicated in terms of the hardware and the sensors, and more in terms of more general purpose sensors, more AI, more machine learning. So because copying machine learning is just copying a program over there. It's so easy to scale, and more you rely on software, less you rely on hardware, easier to scale. And I think looking at ways we can sort of do that will rely more on intelligence rather than specialized expensive devices to more we can sort of scale this up.
Yeah, I'll add on to that with being able to have, so disco is an example, disco, we can't put disco into everybody's hands, and that's one diver in one location at one point in time. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to take that technology, we're trying to take those ideas, and we're trying to miniaturize it. We're trying to shrink it down, and we're trying to make it low cost so that you can actually make small deployable sensors that can be placed on reefs globally, and then sending us that data back, which is going to be a gigantic data stream, which then comes back to this machine learning and how do we be able to look for these warning signs and process and analyze. But I just want to, to the community engagement aspect, I also think that not only do we need robots and we need deployable sensors, but we also need to bring in the community. So if you think about, how many people are certified to dive or snorkel or even just swim in coastlines and waters and go out to coral reefs daily, all the time, all over the world. So we really need to start using people as our platform, including you in the audience. And so what we want to ultimately do is take some of these sensors that we're developing, and we want to integrate them into, say, dive watches, or integrate it into your BC, or some way that we can make you the sensing platform. And then we're just starting now a new collaboration that we're initiating with PADI, which is the Professional Association of Diving Instructors. So they have an outreach component, an education component called PADI Aware. And so we're starting this collaboration with them to say, look, if we can build this sensing platform that can be put on divers and snorkelers and swimmers, will you help us disseminate it around the world through dive shops everywhere, where we can get divers in the water and helping us solve this problem? And I think that's where we really need to go.
It's really exciting.
Because there's people diving and swimming everywhere, all over the world, all the time. And that would be where I think our future is. And it would also engage the community into helping make a difference, right? And also bring in nonprofit organizations and to also
you could put it in the hands of fishermen in coral reef nations, right, who depend on these reefs for their day-to-day livelihood, but you could have them also helping to gather the data.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, and then that's like an example of we can do this now, right? We do
Right.
we can. There's a way to scale things up right now. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Ken, any online questions?
Let's see.
I see we've got one in the room, so why don't we go to that first, and then I'll come back to you.
I see that aquaculture is expanding worldwide. all
Aquaculture?
countries. Do you feel as though this has a positive or negative effect on coral reefs, the end products? Because it doesn't look like they're doing everything the way it should be done. It seems like they're using artificial means to increase their production. Is this having a detrimental effect on the coral reefs, or has it been studied?
I can attempt. So there's been recently there's been a shift in. There's been a growing sort of shift in like how we do aquaculture. Like earlier, all the aquaculture was like closed shore, giant tanks or lots of polluting to pollution happening and going into maybe these reefs and all those things. But I think there's a slow move to. But there's people also found that you grew fish and they will get diseases all the time, and the whole farm will pick up some disease, and they're very complicated and very bad. So, but recently there's been a move to have more offshore aquaculture farms, which like kind of putting this farm in the maybe
open ocean,
lots of in the middle of the ocean where there's lots of flow, and so they in some ways like you grow much healthier fish. You can place them where there are no coral reefs, so it's easy to sort of prevent them from kind of directly affecting. But then the challenge there though is like harder to manage them, right? So that's where actually a lot of there's robots and automated sort of sensing and platform technologies are people have been using a lot of them to sort of manage these farms, because it can be very dangerous and complicated to kind of go send a person there all the time. So I think robots have been sort of enabling.
That's right. We have people here at WHOI working more on kelp aquaculture, and I know robots are part of that picture as well, to monitor them and make sure everything's going well. But those don't actually require any inputs. They just grow naturally in the water without fertilizer or anything like that. So, yes, Ken.
So Alan points out, a key aspect of determining or of addressing the causes of reef decline is often how quickly information can get back to people and the local stakeholders who may also be affecting the reef on a local basis. So what kinds of techniques are being used to get actionable information to people and communities, particularly those with limited resources and in far-flung places of the oceans?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I think I think the primary way right now is a lot of nonprofit organizations that are in small local communities that are trying to help. At least in the work that we've been doing in the Virgin Islands, U.S. Virgin Islands, there's a nonprofit kind of ocean stewards community that these are all kind of volunteers that go out and are assessing reefs all the time and dive, pretty much daily to go out and look at how the reefs are doing. Beyond that, I know there's interest in developing kind of satellite kind of based imaging that can look at more remote locations. But there again, you're gonna wait until the reef is white, right? Or you're showing some massive change in the reef architecture. That's only going to tell you that something's wrong when it's such an extreme change that you see it. I see Ken's hand up.
Ken, go ahead.
Several people have been asking this quite a bit on Zoom, and we've gotten well over 100 questions running there. But I'll use Steve's as a template for this. He says, it seems that replanting reefs requires a great deal of logistics and people with a certain degree of skill. What are little things that people can do to provide a difference for coral reefs? And I would add, especially people who maybe don't live near a shoreline or who have never been to a reef.
Well, I mean, I can take a stab at that myself, right? It's all the basic things you think of, right? I mean, a lot of this is linked to climate change, obviously. So there's all the things one could do to help alleviate climate change. I know that as far as people who do go to reefs, there's certain kind of sunscreens that are bad for reefs, right? So don't use those sunscreens. All these little things, plastics, obviously, we don't really know what they're doing on reefs at this point, but the more you reduce your plastic use, the better. All of those kind of broad sweeping things can come into play for coral reefs, just like every other ocean ecosystem. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, and I was just going to say that education is key, right? To educate people about how they can do little things to make a difference, and there are also some nonprofits that are kind of popping up that are training the communities. If you do go to a reef, or you live in a location where you have access to a reef, there are nonprofits that are starting to work with the community, say, hey, we're going to train you on how to go out and put these outplants out. So to help plant baby corals out, there's a number of different communities or groups that are trying to train again the community again to help with this replantation and repopulation of reefs. So there's that kind of aspect as well, as again one person can't do a whole reef, but if we all work together, we can start making a difference in trying to outplant these corals for that one approach.
All right. So I think we need to end it there as far as the questions go. But please do stay with us, online audience, because we have, in just a second here, we're going to show a film that we're really excited to share with you about the Reef Solutions Initiative. So stay tuned for that. First, I want to say a very big thank you to Colleen, Hansel, and Yogi Girdhar for joining us tonight to share what they're doing in their work on coral reefs with all of us here tonight. So let's give them a big hand. And as always, a very big thank you to all my WHOI colleagues who are working so hard behind the scenes to make these events possible. This one in particular, I know, was a big technical challenge to be both online and in person simultaneously. So let's give all of them a big hand as well. And to everyone who joined us here in Woods Hole and online, whether you're on Zoom or Facebook or YouTube, thank you very much. If you enjoy our Ocean Encounters programs, you can be part of WHOI's solution-based approach to ocean science. Please consider becoming a WHOI member. I think almost everyone in the room here is a WHOI member already, but if you're listening online, you'll be giving crucial support to our outreach efforts like this one, to our education programs, to our engineers and our scientists. And in celebration of World Ocean Day, as was mentioned earlier, a group of generous supporters has come together to actually do a triple match for us today. And so any gift received today will be met by this triple match, which is really terrific. So please do join us. Before we close tonight with that film I just mentioned, we have another brief video message. This one is from a WHOI scientist named Amy April. Amy is the head of the Reef Solutions Initiative. She couldn't be with us here tonight because she's actually off doing research on coral reefs in the Cayman Islands right now. So let's hear from Amy.
Hello everyone, I'm so sorry I couldn't be there with you tonight. I'm here on beautiful Little Cayman, studying the microbial associates of the corals here, which are actually really special. These corals have managed to avoid getting the stony coral tissue loss disease that's plaguing most of the Northern Caribbean. As you've heard tonight, coral reefs are indeed in crisis worldwide, but with scientific advances and new technology, there's still time to turn things around. Yogi, Colleen, and all of the Reef Solutions team are already taking action on a plan that could halt and even reverse the coral reef crisis. But to really work, we need your help. We need to be able to take our prototype technologies and our pilot projects and scale them up. And we need to show the world that what we can do will work and that will work on a global scale. So now I invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy our new film, Hope for Corals in Crisis, which takes you on a behind-the-scenes look at the development of our approaches and new technology. With your help, we can truly give reefs the chance that they deserve. Thanks for watching.
As soon as I splash down on a healthy coral reef, it's like a bustling little city. I'm immediately drawn to the activity, what's moving. Fish of various sizes and colors.
You can focus in on one specific area and you'll just see it teeming with life.
Snapping shrimp snapping and the parrotfish chirping and the damselfish whistling to each other. There's no other place in the natural world where you get bombarded with so many colors, shapes, textures. It's just like a party going on there all the time.
Coming down on an unhealthy reef is just such a different experience.
Not only do you miss those colors, but you miss that three-dimensional structure. They are just like so bland compared to when you see a healthy reef. It looks like something died there, and basically it's the ecosystem has died there.
Reefs are incredibly complex, and therefore they require a multidisciplinary team. So we have experts in chemistry, microbiology, acoustics, and robotics that are helping us innovate the solutions that we need to help save these coral reefs. I'm a microbial ecologist, so I specialize in the smallest organisms in the ocean, the microbes. Our lab looks at the microbes from both healthy, how are they helping, but also we're taking that critical view of them as pathogens and trying to understand who's involved in some of those diseases. Basically what we do is we send a diver down with a set of syringes, and they're hovering above the coral and taking a water sample. Those samples get processed on the boat, and then that comes back to my lab here at the Woods Hole Oceanographic, where we have all the equipment we need to be able to extract the DNA and sequence that DNA and understand what microbes are there, what kinds of genes they have. Do we actually see a unique signature coming off that coral, and does it change with health state of the coral?
Maybe with that one too.
I kind of think of myself as a sensory biologist. I like to get the animal's perspective of the world around it. And a lot of my background or my work is focused on listening, hearing, sound in the sea. There you go. The first way we started thinking about this is just listening to the reefs in general and putting out these sort of sound recording microphones called hydrophones. And we set it to record for usually 1 minute every 10 minutes. And that allows us to get essentially the patterns of what's happening on our reef. We kind of set up these frames, essentially these anchors. They're just rebar stakes. We affix the listening structure to that rebar stake, and then we can leave it there for a month at a time. What we're really listening for or assessing on reefs is the fish sound. So we think that's really, really important. You can begin to kind of then listen for changes in your reefs, and you can tell that disease is coming, or the warming is happening, or there's a change essentially in the animal patterns and their calling rates on that reef. And when that disease hits, we can notice a very audible difference in those reefs, particularly that coral hub, that pillar coral, where it's a lot quieter out. And it kind of shows you that you're beginning to kind of lose that community center of the reef, and losing those is going to be really detrimental to the reef. We're finding that healthy reefs have a particular sound, and that can increase coral settlement on those reefs. So that begs the question, can we play sounds and bring larvae back to that reef? And that's where we're going now. And so that's a really intriguing finding, that we can begin to kind of rebuild that reef.
The expertise that I bring is that I study the chemistry of organismal health. So what are the chemicals that control the organism's immune system, and then how can we boost that immunity to help organisms survive? These are the same chemicals that our bodies use to fight off colds or when we get infected with a pathogen. And the same chemicals are being produced by corals, but they're really hard to measure because they live for about 30 seconds within the ocean. So what we need to be able to do is develop sensors to go in and measure it within the reef, which is what we've been working on for about the last 5 years. Our hope and goal is to make this autonomous. So what we want to do is miniaturize it, bring it down to the size of a button. And what we want to be able to do is make these deployable, where we can stick them out right at the surfaces of various corals within a reef, and then have that information sent to us via satellite in real time.
As a roboticist and a computer scientist, a coral reef ecosystem is a very interesting space for a robot to work in and try to understand what's happening. And so what I hope to do is make our robots understand the coral reef ecosystems and then use that understanding to make decisions.
It looks like a tangled 2-3 track lines, then we can do a lawnmower after that.
We have a bunch of robots and like different students leading each experiment. There's a student who's working on the following animals around. There's another student working on how species are distributed. Another student is working on like how to teach robots what to pay attention to. The chance of you doing state-of-the-art stuff is much more when you have students on the project. The ultimate goal is to have a team of autonomous robots, easily deployable, widely available, monitoring coral reefs, and to be able to detect something going bad early so that we can do something about it. It's only recently that we have made this progress in machine learning and AI techniques that we have a chance to fully make a difference.
If coral reefs are going to survive, they need people, they need science, and they need technology. They need people to understand the problems, they need scientists to develop the solutions, and they need technology to scale up the solutions to reach all reefs worldwide.
What we want to be able to do is find early stage indicators of stress.
Detect the signs of stress to a coral before we visually see them.
The ultimate goal is to be able to diagnose a coral reef early on enough that we could do some intervention to fix it.
What we want to see is solutions that we can actually apply to the reef. So that is the ultimate success that we're looking for, is developing new solutions and making them scalable. Being able to communicate what we're doing and tell the story of the reefs is also going to be an important part of our success. It would be a big problem if we lost reefs without telling people the story that there's still time. That's also a really important part of what we're trying to do, is just raise more awareness about the current situation with reefs and what people can do to help and how we are really working towards solutions.